I walked into our apartment expecting to find Sophie tossing last-minute things into her suitcase, probably stressing about whether she'd packed enough outfits for our honeymoon planning weekend in Wisconsin. The wedding was 3 weeks away, and she'd been obsessing over every detail like her life depended on it. Instead, I found my fiancé in bed with my sister. The scene hit me in fragments. Sophie's strawberry blonde hair spilled across our pillows. Nora's burgundy cardigan crumpled on the floor next to Sophie's cream blouse. The way they both froze when they heard the front door. Not like they'd been caught doing something wrong, but like they'd been interrupted. "Elijah," Sophie scrambled for the sheet, her green eyes wide. "You're early." Early, like I'd shown up to the wrong movie screening. Nora didn't bother covering herself. She just sat up against the headboard, her dark hair messy around her shoulders, and looked at me with this expression I couldn't read. Not guilty, not sorry, something else entirely. "How long?" The words came out steadier than I felt. Sophie was pulling on her blouse now, fingers fumbling with the buttons. This isn't what you think." "How long, Sophie?" "A few months." Nora's voice cut through Sophie's stammering. "Since your birthday party." 4 months. 4 months of family dinners where Nora would show up late and Sophie would defend her. 4 months of Sophie suggesting we invite Nora to things, saying she seemed lonely. 4 months of me thinking my fiancé was just being kind to my difficult little sister. "It just happened," Sophie said, finally getting her blouse buttoned. "We didn't plan this, Eli. We never meant for. I'm pregnant." The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Sophie's face went white. My vision tunneled until all I could see was Nora's face, that same defiant look she'd worn as a kid when she'd broken something and was waiting to see if she'd get in trouble. "Nora." Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. "What?" Nora shrugged. He was going to find out eventually. I stood there trying to process the math, the timeline, the way Sophie was looking at Nora like she'd just set the apartment on fire, which, I guess, she had. "Whose is it?" I asked. Nora's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Does it matter?" Sophie was crying now, mascara making dark tracks down her cheeks. "Elijah, please, let me explain. This whole thing got so complicated and I never wanted to hurt you." "You know what's funny?" Nora interrupted, pulling my old Northwestern t-shirt over her head, the one Sophie must have given her. "I always wondered what it would be like to have something that belonged to you first." That's when I understood. This wasn't about love or lust or even attraction. This was about power, about Nora finally winning whatever game she'd been playing since we were kids. And Sophie had let herself become a weapon in my sister's war against me. "Eli, don't go." Sophie was on her feet now, reaching for me. "We can work through this, we can figure it out." But I was already backing toward the door. The apartment felt too small, the air too thin. Everything I'd thought I knew about my life was reshaping itself into something unrecognizable. "Please," Sophie said, "just talk to me." I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to find the woman I'd planned to marry in 3 weeks. The woman who'd helped me pick out paint colors for the nursery we'd talked about. The woman who'd said she loved how close I was with my family. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. I grabbed my keys from the bowl by the door and left. Behind me I heard Sophie calling my name, but I didn't turn around. The hallway felt like a tunnel, the elevator like a coffin. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove without thinking, muscle memory carrying me through Chicago's afternoon traffic, while my brain tried to catch up with what had just happened. The radio was playing some cheerful pop song that felt like it was coming from another planet. I turned it off and drove in silence, taking random turns until I found myself heading east toward the lake. The parking lot at Montrose Beach was nearly empty. I sat in my car staring at the gray water, watching waves roll in like they had every day for thousands of years, completely indifferent to the fact that my life had just imploded. My phone started buzzing, Sophie's name on the screen, then Nora's, then Sophie again. I turned it off and shoved it in the glove compartment. The sun was setting behind me, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if I could feel anything besides this hollow ache in my chest. I kept replaying the scene, looking for clues I'd missed. Sophie's new perfume that I'd thought was just her trying something different. The way Nora had started texting more, asking about our plans. How Sophie always seemed to know when Nora was having a bad day. I'd been so proud of how well they were getting along. A jogger ran past my car, earbuds in, completely absorbed in her own world. I envied her. I wanted to be anyone else, anywhere else, living any life but this one. The temperature was dropping, and I could see my breath fogging the windows. I should go back. I should face this like an adult, have the conversations that needed to happen, figure out how to untangle 3 lives that had gotten twisted together in the worst possible way. Instead, I sat there until the parking lot emptied completely, and the only light came from the street lamps reflecting off the water. My phone was probably full of messages by now, but I couldn't bring myself to check. Whatever Sophie and Nora had to say, I wasn't ready to hear it. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going back to that apartment, to that life, to the wedding that was supposed to happen in 3 weeks. I was going to disappear, at least for a while. Find somewhere quiet where I could figure out who I was when I wasn't busy being the good son, the understanding brother, the reliable fiancé. I started the car and drove away from the lake, away from Chicago, away from everything I'd thought I wanted. For the first time in years, I had no idea where I was going, and that felt like the only honest thing left. 3 hours of driving aimlessly through Chicago's suburbs had burned through most of my gas tank, and none of my anger. I kept circling back to the same thought. I needed my stuff, my clothes, my art supplies, the few things in that apartment that actually belonged to me before Sophie had redecorated our entire life into something that looked like a magazine spread. The rational part of my brain knew Sophie would be at work by now. She never missed meetings, even during personal crises, probably sitting in some conference room pretending everything was normal while her phone buzzed with increasingly frantic texts from Nora. The thought of my sister still being there, maybe wearing more of my clothes, made my stomach twist, but I needed to do this. Rip the band-aid off, grab what mattered, and get out before I lost my nerve. The apartment building looked exactly the same as it had 3 hours ago, which felt impossible. Shouldn't the world look different when your life exploded? The doorman nodded at me like always, and I realized he had no idea that I didn't live here anymore, that I'd probably never live here again. My hands were steadier now as I unlocked the door. The silence hit me first. No voices, no movement, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Sophie's cream blouse was gone from the bedroom floor, but the sheets were still rumpled. I grabbed my largest suitcase from the closet and started throwing things into it without much thought. Jeans, sweaters, the good boots my mom had bought me last Christmas. I avoided looking at the bed entirely. The bathroom was worse somehow. Sophie's makeup scattered across the counter, her toothbrush next to mine like nothing had changed. I grabbed my stuff and got out of there fast, moving to the living room where I could breathe again. My art supplies were stacked in the corner where I'd left them weeks ago, back when I still thought I might have time to paint after the wedding. Brushes, tubes of paint, the sketchbooks I'd been filling with ideas I never had time to develop. I packed them carefully, muscle memory from art school kicking in. These mattered more than the furniture or the kitchen gadgets or any of the other stuff we'd accumulated together. My phone was buzzing again from the glove compartment of my car, but I ignored it. Whatever Sophie or Nora had to say could wait until I figured out what I wanted to hear. By the time I'd loaded everything into my Honda, the sun was getting low and I still had no idea where I was going. I sat in the parking garage scrolling through rental websites on my phone, looking for something, anything, that wasn't Chicago. The prices in the city were insane, and the suburbs felt too close. I needed distance, real distance. That's when I remembered Saugatuck. I'd gone there maybe 5 years ago for a weekend with some college friends. Small town on the Lake Michigan coast, full of artists and tourists and people who seemed to move at a different speed than the rest of the world. It had felt like stepping into a postcard, all rolling dunes and Victorian houses and galleries tucked into converted barns. More importantly, it was 3 hours away and nothing like Chicago. I found a real estate website for the area and started scrolling through rentals. Most of the places were vacation homes with week-long minimums and prices that made my eyes water, but then I found something different. A small cottage listed as month-to-month, perfect for artists or writers seeking solitude. The photos showed a simple wooden house perched on a bluff, with huge windows facing the lake and what looked like a separate studio space. The contact was a guy named Jackson Ryan. I called before I could talk myself out of it. Ryan Real Estate. His voice had that easy, unhurried quality that people from small towns seem to master. "Hi, I'm calling about the cottage rental, the one on the bluff." "Sure thing. You looking for a summer place?" "Something like that." I paused, trying to figure out how much to explain. "I need somewhere quiet, away from the city." The listing said month to month. "That's right." Previous tenant was an artist, left it set up as a studio. "You in the arts?" "I paint, sometimes." It felt strange saying it out loud. I'd been an art therapist for so long that my own creative work felt like a secret hobby. "Well, you'd like the light then. Big windows facing west, catches the sunset over the water." "When were you thinking of moving in?" I looked around the parking garage, at my car loaded with everything I owned that mattered. Tonight, there was a pause. Everything okay? Wedding got called off. The words came out easier than I expected. Need a change of scenery. Ah, his voice softened with understanding. Been there. Tell you what, I can meet you at the place around 8 if you want to take a look. No pressure, but it might be exactly what you need. 3 hours later, I was following Jackson's pickup truck down a winding dirt road that led through scrubby dunes toward the sound of waves. The cottage appeared through the trees like something from a fairy tale. Weathered cedar shingles, a wraparound porch, and those massive windows that seemed to glow in the fading light. Jackson was exactly what I'd expected from his voice. Mid-40s, work boots, the kind of guy who probably knew how to fix anything that broke. He showed me around without asking too many questions, pointing out the wood stove and the generator backup, and the way the studio space had been set up with easels and storage. Previous tenant left in a hurry, he said, gesturing to canvases stacked against one wall. Said, I could throw out whatever she didn't take, but seemed like a waste. You're welcome to use any of it. The cottage was perfect, isolated enough that I wouldn't have to make small talk with neighbors, but not so remote that I'd go completely feral. The rent was reasonable, especially for a place with this kind of view. I signed the lease on the spot. You need anything else tonight? Jackson asked as he handed me the keys. Town's got a decent grocery store, stays open till 9. I'm good. Thanks for meeting me so late, he shrugged. Sometimes life doesn't wait for business hours. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, this place has a way of helping people figure things out. Something about the water, maybe. After he left, I stood on the porch listening to the waves crash against the bluff below. The sound was constant but not repetitive, each wave slightly different from the last. In Chicago, I'd gotten used to sirens and car horns, and the general hum of 8 million people trying to get somewhere else. This was the opposite of that, the sound of staying still. I brought my suitcases inside, and looked around at what was apparently my new home. The furniture was simple but comfortable, all wood and worn fabric that looked like it had been chosen for durability rather than style. The kitchen was tiny but functional. The bedroom had a view of the lake that would probably be incredible in the morning. But it was the studio that drew me back. The previous tenant had left behind more than just canvases. There were tubes of paint, brushes in various stages of wear, palette knives, even a few bottles of medium that hadn't dried out yet. It felt like walking into someone else's abandoned dream. I picked up one of the brushes, testing the weight of it in my hand. When was the last time I'd painted something that wasn't part of a therapy session? Something that was just for me. Just because I wanted to see what would happen when I put color on canvas. The light was almost gone now, but I found a lamp and set up one of the blank canvases on an easel. I squeezed out some paint, raw umber, cadmium red, Prussian blue, and mixed them without thinking, letting my hands remember what they used to know. The first brushstroke felt like coming home. I painted until my back ached and my eyes burned from squinting in the lamplight. Nothing planned, nothing pretty, just color and movement, and the physical act of making something exist that hadn't existed before. Dark shapes that might have been figures, or buildings, or just the inside of my head made visible. When I finally stepped back, I realized I'd been crying. Not the angry tears from earlier, but something deeper. Relief, maybe, or grief for all the years I'd spent helping other people express their feelings while keeping my own locked away. The painting was a mess, muddy colors and harsh lines that probably violated every principle of good composition I'd ever learned. But it was mine. The first thing I'd created in years that belonged completely to me. I cleaned the brushes and turned off the lamp, but I didn't cover the canvas. Tomorrow, I'd see it in daylight and probably hate it, but tonight it felt like a beginning. Outside, the waves kept their steady rhythm against the shore. I fell asleep to that sound, and for the first time in months, I didn't dream about weddings or betrayals, or the life I'd thought I wanted. I dreamed about color. The knock came on a Tuesday afternoon when the rain was hitting the cottage windows like thrown pebbles. I'd been working on a new piece, something with jagged lines and colors that reminded me of broken glass, when I heard footsteps on the porch. For a second my stomach dropped. 6 months of silence from Chicago, and I'd gotten comfortable with the idea that maybe everyone had finally given up on finding me. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Sophie or Nora standing there getting soaked. It was a woman I'd never seen before, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair plastered to her head, and the kind of confidence that didn't seem bothered by looking like a drowned cat. Elijah Romero. She had to raise her voice over the rain drumming on the porch roof. Depends who's asking. She smiled at that. Aurora Shelton. I own the Shelton Gallery in town. Mind if I come in? I promise I'm not here to sell you anything. I stepped back and let her in, watching as she shook the rain from her jacket and looked around the cottage with the kind of attention that made me suddenly aware of how I'd been living. Canvases everywhere, paint tubes scattered across the kitchen table, the general chaos of someone who'd stopped caring about normal things like organization. Coffee, I offered, mostly because I needed something to do with my hands. That would be great. She was already moving toward the studio area, drawn like a magnet to the paintings I had propped against the walls. I've been seeing your work around town, the pieces you sell at the farmer's market. I busied myself with the coffee maker, trying to read her expression as she studied my paintings. Most people looked at them and got uncomfortable. Too much raw emotion, too much mess. But Aurora moved from canvas to canvas, with the kind of focus that told me she actually knew what she was looking at. "These are incredible," she said, stopping in front of a series I'd been working on for the past month. Dark abstracts with sharp lines cutting through muddy colors. "What do you call this series?" "Fractures." The word came out rougher than I intended. She nodded like that made perfect sense. "They're about relationships breaking apart." It wasn't a question, and I didn't bother denying it. "Something like that. I'd like to include some of these in our next group show. We're featuring local artists who work in emotional abstraction." She turned to face me, and her eyes were the kind of hazel that shifted between green and gold depending on the light. "The opening is in 3 weeks. Are you interested?" I handed her a mug of coffee and tried to process what she was asking. "I'm not really a professional artist. I mean, I was an art therapist, but my own work. Your own work speaks for itself." She gestured toward the paintings. "These aren't therapy exercises, they're the real thing." Something in her voice made me believe her. Not the polite encouragement I was used to, but genuine recognition, like she saw something in my mess that I hadn't even realized was there. "What would it involve?" "We'd select maybe 4 or 5 pieces, frame them properly, price them for sale, include you in the opening reception." She paused, studying my face. "When's the last time you showed your work? Really showed it, not just selling sketches at the market?" "College, maybe. And that was just student shows." "Then it's time." She set down her coffee mug and pulled a business card from her jacket pocket. "Think about it, but don't think too long. I need to know by Friday if you want in." After she left, I stood in the studio looking at my paintings through her eyes. 6 months of pouring everything I couldn't say into color and line, and maybe it had actually added up to something. The idea of strangers looking at these pieces, seeing all the anger and hurt I'd been working through, made my chest tight, but there was something else there too. Excitement, maybe, or just the possibility that all this pain might actually be useful for something. I was still thinking about it that evening, when my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I'd gotten careless about screening calls since moving here. Most of the time it was just Jackson checking in, or someone from town with a question about the cottage. "Eli?" Sophie's voice hit me like cold water. "Please don't hang up." I almost did anyway. 6 months of silence, and now she was calling like we'd just talked yesterday. "What do you want, Sophie?" "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to call, but I needed to tell you." Her voice cracked. "Nora lied about the baby." I sat down hard on the couch. "What do you mean?" "It wasn't yours. It wasn't even God, Eli. She played us both. The father was some married guy she'd been seeing. She told me it might be yours to keep me from leaving, and she told you it was mine to hurt you more." Sophie was crying now, the words coming out in a rush. "I found out after I moved to Portland. She called me drunk one night and admitted everything." The cottage felt too small suddenly. I walked to the window and stared out at the lake, trying to process what she was telling me. "Why are you calling me now?" "Because she's looking for you. She lost the baby, Eli. Miscarriage at 5 months. And the guy, the real father, he wants nothing to do with her. She's broke, she's desperate, and she thinks you're the only person who might take her in." My reflection in the window looked like a stranger, thinner than I'd been in Chicago, hair longer, eyes that had seen too much. "How do you know all this?" "She called me last week, begging me to tell her where you went. I didn't. I swear I didn't tell her anything. But she's resourceful when she wants something, and you thought I should know. I thought you deserved a warning." Sophie's voice got quiet. "I know what I did was unforgivable. I know I destroyed everything good we had, but I still care about you, and I don't want her to hurt you again." After I hung up, I sat in the dark listening to the rain and trying to figure out how I felt. Angry that Nora had lied about something so huge. Relieved that the baby hadn't been caught in the middle of our family's mess. Exhausted by the thought that this wasn't over, that my sister was still out there looking for ways to pull me back into her chaos. The next morning I drove into town to find Jackson. He was at his office, feet up on his desk, reading what looked like a fishing magazine. "Morning," he said without looking up. "How's the cottage treating you?" "Good. Listen, has anyone been asking about me? Someone from Chicago, maybe?" He set down the magazine and gave me a look that said he'd been expecting this question. "Young woman came by yesterday. Dark hair. Said she was your sister. Wanted to know where you were staying." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. Told her I don't give out tenant information to anyone, family or not." He leaned back in his chair. "She seemed pretty desperate though. Kept saying it was an emergency, that she needed to make things right with you. If she comes back, I won't tell her anything." Jackson's voice was firm. "But Eli, if someone's determined enough to drive 3 hours looking for you, they're probably not going to give up easy." He was right. I knew Nora well enough to know that being told no would only make her more determined. She'd find another way, ask other people, keep pushing until she got what she wanted. That evening, I was cleaning brushes in the kitchen sink when I saw her through the window, sitting on my porch steps like she belonged there, looking smaller than I remembered. Her hair was shorter, and she'd lost weight. The burgundy cardigan she was wearing looked too big for her now. I could have pretended not to be home, could have waited her out, hoped she'd eventually give up and leave. But I was tired of running, tired of looking over my shoulder. If we were going to do this, better to get it over with. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Nora looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted. "Hi, Eli." "Nora." She gestured to the space beside her on the steps. "Can you sit? Just for a minute?" I stayed standing. "What do you want?" "I lost the baby." The words came out flat, like she'd practiced saying them. 5 months. The doctor said it just happens sometimes, that there wasn't anything I could have done differently. I felt something twist in my chest. Not relief exactly, but not sadness either. Just a hollow recognition that one more thing had broken in our family's long history of breaking things. "I'm sorry. Are you?" She looked up at me with something that might have been hope, because I wasn't sure. "I thought maybe you'd be glad." The honesty of it caught me off guard. "I'm not glad a baby died, Nora, but you're not sorry I'm hurting." I thought about that. 6 months ago, the answer would have been automatic. Of course I was sorry she was hurting. Of course I wanted to help. But now, looking at her sitting on my porch in the place I'd built specifically to get away from her, I wasn't sure. "I don't know," I said finally. "I don't know how I feel about any of this." She nodded like that was fair. "Sophie left me. After she found out the baby wasn't yours, wasn't anyone's who mattered. She said I was toxic, that I destroyed everything I touched." Nora's voice got smaller. Maybe she was right. Maybe she was. The words hung between us in the evening air. Nora flinched like I'd slapped her, but she didn't argue. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said finally. "Mom and Dad cut me off after they found out about the wedding, said I was on my own until I learned to take responsibility for my choices. So you came here. So I came here." She looked out at the lake, where the last light was fading into purple. "I thought maybe we could start over. Maybe this could be good for both of us." I sat down then, not next to her but on the porch railing where I could see her face. She looked older than 27, worn down by whatever the last 6 months had put her through. "Tell me about the real father," I said. Her shoulders sagged. "His name is Marcus. He's married, has 2 kids. I met him at that gallery opening you took me to last year, remember? The one where you said I should network more, meet people in the art world." I remembered. I'd been trying to help her find direction, introduce her to people who might give her opportunities. Instead, she'd found another way to blow up her life. "He told me he was getting divorced. Said his wife didn't understand him. All the usual garbage married men say." Nora's laugh was bitter. "I believed him because I wanted to, because it felt good to be chosen by someone successful, someone who seemed to have his life together. When did you find out he was lying?" "When I told him about the baby. He said if I tried to contact him again, he'd have me arrested for harassment." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "That's when I realized I was completely alone. No boyfriend, no baby daddy, no sister-in-law who thought I was fun and spontaneous instead of just destructive. So you decided to destroy my life instead. I decided to take something that was yours." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for months. I was so angry, Eli. At Marcus. At myself. At the whole world. But mostly at you. At me? For what? For being perfect. For having everything work out. For never making the kind of mistakes that ruin your whole life. She turned to face me fully. "Do you know what it's like growing up next to someone who never fails at anything, who everyone loves and trusts and relies on?" "I'm not perfect, Nora." You were perfect enough. Perfect enough that mom and dad always took your side. Perfect enough that your fiancé thought you hung the moon. Perfect enough that I spent my whole life feeling like the broken one. The pain in her voice was real, and part of me wanted to reach for her the way I always had when we were kids. But I'd learned something in the last 6 months about the difference between helping someone and letting them drag you down with them. So you decided to break me too. I decided to prove you weren't as perfect as everyone thought. She was crying now, but quietly. I thought if I could take Sophie away from you, if I could show everyone that you could be hurt and abandoned just like anyone else, then maybe I wouldn't feel so alone in being the family disaster. And how did that work out for you? It didn't. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turns out destroying other people's happiness doesn't make you any happier. It just makes you the kind of person who destroys things. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the waves and the sound of Nora crying. The cottage behind us was warm and bright, full of paintings that had helped me work through the worst of what she'd done to me. But she was still here on my porch, still broken, still looking for someone to save her from the consequences of her choices. I can't let you stay here, I said finally. She looked up at me with something that might have been surprise. Eli. I can't do it anymore, Nora. I can't be the person who fixes your mistakes and cleans up your messes and pretends that what you did was just another thing we need to get past as a family. But I'm sorry. I'm really truly sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't undo 6 months of wondering what was wrong with me that my own sister hated me enough to destroy my life. Sorry doesn't give me back the wedding I actually wanted, or the relationship I thought I had with Sophie, or the trust I used to have in the people closest to me. Nora was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was small. So what happens now? Now you figure out how to build a life that doesn't depend on me rescuing you from it. I don't know how to do that. Then you learn. She stood up slowly, like her bones hurt. I really am sorry, Eli, for all of it. I know that doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know. I know. And I know you probably can't forgive me. Maybe you shouldn't. I watched her walk to her car, this woman who used to be my little sister, who I'd spent years protecting and defending and making excuses for. She looked back once before getting in, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Not defiance or manipulation, or the expectation that I'd change my mind and call her back. Just acceptance that this was the choice she'd made, and these were the consequences she'd have to live with. After her taillights disappeared down the dirt road, I went back inside and looked at Aurora's business card, still sitting on my kitchen table where I'd left it 3 days ago. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. Aurora, it's Elijah, about the gallery show I'm in. I stood there watching Nora's car disappear into the darkness, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to my toes. Not the shaky relief I'd expected, but something steadier. Like I'd finally stopped holding my breath for a conversation that was never going to go the way I needed it to. The cottage felt different when I went back inside, quieter, but not empty. Just mine again. The paper was thick, expensive, with her name printed in simple black letters. No fancy fonts or unnecessary flourishes. Just Aurora Shelton, gallery owner, and a phone number that might change everything. My phone was already in my hand before I could talk myself out of it. Aurora, it's Elijah. About the gallery show, I'm in. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the Shelton Gallery watching strangers look at my paintings like they meant something. The opening had drawn more people than I'd expected, not just the usual art crowd, but locals I recognized from the farmers market, tourists who'd wandered in from dinner, even Jackson, who kept nodding at my work like he'd known all along this was where I was headed. The artist captures something raw here, I heard a woman say to her companion as they studied one of my fractures pieces. You can feel the emotional weight. 6 months ago, the idea of people analyzing my feelings in public would have made me want to hide in the bathroom. Tonight, it felt like validation, like all those hours of throwing paint at canvas until something true emerged, had actually added up to something worth sharing. Aurora appeared at my elbow with a glass of wine, and that smile that made her eyes shift from green to gold. How are you holding up? Better than I thought I would. I took the wine gratefully. This is surreal. This is what happens when you stop hiding your talent. She gestured toward a cluster of people examining my latest series. Darker pieces I'd finished just last week, all sharp angles and bleeding colors. That couple over there? They're from Grand Rapids. Drove 2 hours specifically to see your work after reading about the show online. I watched the couple point at different sections of the painting, having the kind of intense discussion that meant they were really seeing it, Not just looking, but connecting with whatever I'd been trying to work through when I painted it. The red piece sold, Aurora said casually, like she was mentioning the weather. Sold. I turned to stare at her. Already? 20 minutes after we opened. Local collector who's been following your market work said he'd been waiting for you to show something bigger. She paused, studying my face. You look surprised. I am surprised. I mean, I hoped people would like them, but actually buying them, I shook my head. It's different. It's validation that what you're doing matters, that your experience, even the painful parts, can create something beautiful that speaks to other people. A man in an expensive suit approached us, the kind of guy who probably had opinions about wine pairings and investment portfolios. Excuse me, are you the artist? That's me. Incredible work, really powerful stuff. He gestured toward the painting that had sold. I was hoping to discuss a commission, something for my office in Chicago. Chicago. The word hit me like a small electric shock, but not the painful kind I'd been expecting. Just recognition of how far I'd traveled, literally and otherwise, from the person who'd fled that city 6 months ago. I'm not really taking commissions right now, I heard myself say. But thank you. The man looked disappointed but handed me his card anyway. After he moved on, Aurora raised an eyebrow. Not interested in Chicago money? Not interested in Chicago anything. I realized as I said it that it was true. Not anger anymore, just a complete lack of desire to go backward. This is where I am now. Good, she touched my arm lightly. Because I was hoping you'd consider doing a solo show next spring. Give you time to develop a full body of work, really establish yourself as a serious artist. A solo show? The idea made my chest tight, but in a good way, like anticipation instead of anxiety. You think I'm ready for that? I think you've been ready for a while. You just needed to believe it yourself. The evening wound down slowly, people drifting out in small groups while Aurora and I cleaned up wine glasses and straightened the remaining paintings. The gallery felt different with just the two of us there, more intimate, like we were sharing a secret. Thank you, I said as she locked the front door. For seeing something in my work when I couldn't see it myself. Thank you for trusting me with it. She turned to face me, and in the dim light from the street lamps, her face looked softer than usual. Can I ask you something? Sure. That night you called about the show, right after your sister left. What changed your mind? I thought about it, trying to find words for something I was still figuring out myself. I realized I'd spent so much time trying to be the person everyone needed me to be, that I'd forgotten who I actually was. The paintings were the first honest thing I'd done in years, and now I think maybe being honest is scarier than being safe, but it's also the only way to build something real. We walked to our cars in comfortable silence, the kind that felt full instead of empty. As I drove back to the cottage, I thought about Nora sitting on my porch 2 weeks ago, expecting me to fold the way I always had, expecting forgiveness to be automatic, because that's how our family had always worked. She'd break something, I'd clean it up, and we'd pretend it never happened. But I'd learned something in those months of solitude and painting, and slowly figuring out who I was when nobody needed me to be anything else. I'd learned that forgiveness didn't have to mean going back to the way things were. That loving someone didn't require letting them hurt you over and over again. The cottage was dark when I pulled into the driveway, but it felt like coming home in a way Chicago never had. Inside, I could see my easel set up by the window, a half-finished canvas waiting for tomorrow's light. The space was mine, not shared, not compromised, not decorated to please anyone else. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the waves, and thinking about the people who'd looked at my paintings tonight like they recognized something in them. Like the pain I'd been working through had transformed into something that could reach across the space between strangers and say, "You're not alone in this." Maybe that's what art was supposed to do. Take the worst things that happened to you, and turn them into bridges instead of walls. My phone buzzed with a text from Aurora. "Congratulations on a beautiful opening. Looking forward to seeing what you create next." I typed back. "Thank you for everything. This feels like the beginning of something, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I meant it.